What's up, IU fans? Your Hoosiers are 6-0. They're bowl eligible. They win at home. They win on the road. They make it look generally easy. There's a little bump against Maryland here and there, a little bump a bit against Northwestern here and there. But Indiana's flying up the AP top 25. And look, we got a bye week, all right? Matt and I will look ahead to Nebraska before the game happens next week. Matt and I we're gonna talk a little bit about Big Ten championship game. We're gonna be talking a little bit about college football playoff. We're gonna be talking a little bit about scenarios, what Indiana's looking for, what Indiana wants to avoid, how realistic is any of this. We're gonna be diving into what we've loved about this team so far and what to look forward to the rest of the year, and so much more here on episode 335 of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Wednesday, October 9th, 2024, where I am your host, Nathan Krishnan. Here with me is my normal co-host, Matt Lukens. Matt, you're going through some technical, things on your end. I'm a little bit under the weather and life is crazy, but Curt Cignetti would want us to keep pushing, keep fighting, keep bringing our best effort to the table, even if there's a little bit of adversity. That's what we're doing here. What impressed you the most about Indiana's last couple of wins? Of course, the Northwestern one, freshest in our minds, knocking off the Wildcats with a big push at the end of the game. What have you seen as far as growth from this team over the last couple of weeks?
Through the first four games, IU steamrolled everybody. It was not close. Outside of for 5 seconds in that FIU game to start the year, the games really have not been close. Like the UCLA game, we jumped out to a 14-0 start. I mean, we beat Western Illinois by 70 something points. That game was also just never close. And then I'm forgetting what the other game was.
Charlotte.
Charlotte also just was never uncomfortable. We actually had some uncomfy games the last two games. Particularly the Northwestern game, I think, was more uncomfy than the Maryland game was for me. Just because we were on the road, right, in a soccer stadium, playing on the banks of of the good old Great Lakes there.
Wow. Right.
Which was honestly it looked fun, on TV. They kept showing the shots of the whole stadium from the lakeshore. It looked like a pretty sweet environment to be at for a football game. But I will say, what stuck out for me though is in both games we were tied. Again, we haven't really faced real adversity yet, because some people are going to hate that I said that. But we really haven't shown what this team does when they're trailing.
Because
right?
they've beat the crap out of everyone, right?
They also they're what, one of three teams this year that through six
they've
games
never trailed.
Not
they,
once.
They clinched bowl eligibility without trailing.
Yeah, it's so impressive. It's unbelievably impressive, really, and that is just all down to one, the players, obviously, because they have to go out there and actually execute. But I think more so for me that it can be credited to the staff's ability to manage a game plan for a game, and then execute that plan. Clearly this staff is superior, not only to just all six staffs of the teams that we've played, but superior to a majority of the other staffs in all of college football. I mean, you looked around this past weekend, Indiana took care of business. You go and look at Alabama, did not take care of business. You go look at Tennessee, did not take care of business. You go and look up and down, USC did not take care of business. You look up and down the top 25 from last week, and it was just a absolute Michigan did not take care of it. Absolute bloodbath.
By the way, sorry if this offends some people. Penn State struggled with a team that Indiana absolutely blitzed the doors off of. Penn State at halftime was what, 14-3 against UCLA, and then they sort of cleared it to the finish line 27-11, won by 16. Last time I recall, Indiana absolutely dominated UCLA on the road. Just saying, Just saying.
Yeah, we were beating them by more than 16 about midway through the second quarter
Yeah.
of that game.
All right.
So, and that was not at home either. So, yeah. And by the way, Indiana continues to be the only Big Ten team that has done the 3 hour time difference road trip either way and won a game away from home. I believe Indiana is the only team to do that. USC is like, I think, 0-2. I think Michigan is 0-1. Everybody that UCLA obviously went to Penn State, lost. There's not a single team that has made the road trip. Washington went to Rutgers and lost. There's not a single team that's made that road trip, that those couple time zones over and won, except for our Indiana Hoosiers. And I will get to, when we talk about my Big Ten picks of the week, I will talk about that, because I actually think it's a bigger deal than people are because they're not talking about it. I think it's a huge deal, and it's a bigger deal than people
No,
actually think.
they don't like to talk
Um,
about. They don't like to talk about that. They don't like to talk about the fact that every single opponent Indiana has faced, Big Ten opponent, is coming off a bye, except for Maryland, who played Villanova the week before they played Indiana. Like no one wants to
yep.
talk about any of that because that doesn't help the narrative.
Yeah, and it also doesn't help the narrative that I think Northwestern is better than what people actually think they are. Like I've seen power rankings for the Big Ten. Everybody has them second to last, in front of Purdue, which I would hope they would be in front of Purdue, given how bad Purdue is. By the way, can we laugh about how bad Purdue is? They're so bad. But no, I think Northwestern actually is better than a lot of teams ahead of them. I think Northwestern's probably better than Michigan State. I haven't seen anything from Michigan State to actually, be even somewhat impressed with them. I think they're better than Minnesota. I think they're better than a couple of Wisconsin. I think they're better than a couple of these Big Ten teams. And I think with you look at Northwestern's schedule, they're going to knock off a team or maybe even two down the stretch here, where people are going to like scratch their heads and be like, where did this team come from? And I just want to be the person to say, I'm saying that it's coming from here. This Northwestern team is not bad. They have an annoying QB. They have an annoyingly decent running game, even though they only got 90 yards on Indiana. And their defense is legit. Like that team,
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
on a windy, yucky day in like November on the
Yep.
lake there, and it's cold as balls outside, and somebody comes into that stadium thinking that they can run the place, and they are going to be in a fight for their life. Okay, so
Yeah.
this win is going to look better for Indiana as it goes on, and I've seen people just disgusting. I've seen people online talking about how we struggled with them. Did we not win by more than three scores? Like, did we not win by 17 points?
Indiana's
Like,
win probability never dropped below 65% throughout that game. Indiana was in firm
exactly.
control the whole game. Never mind like
Yeah, it was
Alabama
just
Vanderbilt, where Alabama lost to Vanderbilt, but in or
yeah.
Tennessee lost to Arkansas, or Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Indiana was
Mizzou got absolutely
yeah,
steamrolled.
just blasted. Indiana had, if you deep dive into the win probability charts, Indiana had at least a 65% chance of winning that game throughout, even when they were up by 3 in the fourth quarter, because of how much they were crushing Northwestern statistically. Northwestern had one or two fluky plays in there that helped their cause. And the same way you feel about Northwestern, I feel about Maryland. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, this is a Maryland passing attack that I think is going to cause some problems for opponents in the weeks to come. Maryland, as we look down the road, is going to host USC. They're going to go to Oregon. They're going to go to Penn State. I think there are going to be some tricky score lines for those opponents against the Terps as we move ahead the rest of the year. But again, that doesn't help those detractors of Indiana who want to point out, oh, IU's got a weak schedule. IU's got weak brand recognition. Indiana, the clock's going to strike midnight and turn into a pumpkin for this Indiana team. The fact is, they are one of the best teams in the country at almost everything. I
And
understand.
that's not because we haven't played anybody. That's because we execute. There are teams. Look at Ohio State's schedule. Like they haven't played anybody either.
And
And yeah, they've looked good, but our statistics are even better than theirs.
And again, I think Ohio State's really good because of how they've played. I think
Yeah.
Texas is excellent because of how they've played. And I just think Indiana's in the same class as those teams instead of two tiers behind at number 18 in the country. But because Indiana came off a 3-9 season and their preseason baseline was number 80 in the country or whatever, they've got a lot more work to do. And so that's just how things have to be. But what that tells me is that, as Curt Cignetti would like to say, there are no self-imposed limitations with this football program. If you're a fan, if you're even a casual who roots for Indiana and whatever, and you're starting to catch on to this football team, do not put your own caveats on what this team is capable of doing. Do not hold yourself back. This is what SEC programs do when their team starts seasons 4-0, 5-0, 6-0, 7-0. Like, guys, I don't know if you've ever encountered Tennessee fans. I don't know if you've ever encountered Arkansas fans or Ole Miss fans, but like,
you don't want to.
But what's great about their fan bases are when they're great, when their teams are doing well, they go to bat for their programs as if, without any hesitation. And this Indiana team deserves that kind of passion really fueling them. That's why Curt Cignetti was gaining so much attention preseason with his language. That's what his motivation was, because he needed to get Indiana on the map before Indiana even played a game.
Yeah.
And he understood that this is a team that should have been preseason top 25 because James Madison was in the AP top 25 at the end of the year last year, and IU upgraded. They upgraded at quarterback. They upgraded at offensive line, right? You took a top 25 James Madison team and added Carter Smith and Mike Caddick and Bray Lynch and Bob Bostad to that team.
Yeah.
So Curt Cignetti is out there saying, guys, if I start talking in November, it's going to be too late. That's why he took the mic at Assembly Hall. That's why he was so outspoken at media days and during fall camp, because he knows that in college football, it's subjective, it's arbitrary. The narratives control who gets into the CFP. And that's how you really raise and garner attention for your program, because then when the games begin, Indiana goes out there and they throttle folks. And they're throttling teams like we've seen so far. And if you ask me, and I think about the growth that this team has made, like, Curtis Work is where it starts. Yeah. Curtis Work has been absolutely sensational. He, if you ask me, is the best passer in college football. Now, Cam Ward does dual threat stuff. You got other, Ashton Genty is amazing as far as running back is concerned.
He should win the Heisman.
Oh, if he wins, I have no complaints, reservations against it. Travis Hunter is unbelievable as a two-way player. If he wins, I'm not going to dispute that. But from what I'm seeing, someone who can hit receivers at all three levels of the field, short, medium, deep, I absolutely love where Curtis Rourke has brought to the table. He's so clinical. He's so experienced. Third downs don't face him. He's getting better. If you talk about growth, I think he's doing better at avoiding sacks in the pocket, evading pressure, buying some extra time to either scramble or hit receivers down the field. I mean, nowadays, we look at a 300-yard performance by Curtis Rourke, and we're just like, all right, cool. It is what it is. On to the next one. Two-time Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. Of course, he shared the award with Emeka Egbuka this past week. And that game on Saturday was very, very tough to throw the ball. I've heard it from folks who were at the game. Our good friend Rob was at the game. I've heard it from people who just, observe things. 20, 25 miles an hour as far as winds are concerned. It was not easy to throw the football. And he goes out there and puts up 350. And it's just, as I look ahead, Matt, personally, I feel like Indiana has the quarterback advantage in every game they play against a Big Ten opponent. Is that crazy to say? Because I once you get to the CFP, we'll talk about that later. But Curtis Work, to me, gives Indiana a quarterback advantage every single week, even if it's against Ohio State, even if it's against Nebraska or Washington or whoever we play in the Big Ten championship game if Indiana gets there. Is that crazy to say?
No, I think he's better than Will Howard. Will Howard's like he's like a game manager on like a little bit of steroids. Like he's not a guy that's going to lose you a football game necessarily, even though he does throw some boneheaded passes with Howard does. I mean, you watch Will Howard throws one pass every single game where I just shake my head and go, "Do you know how to play quarterback?" And Curtis Rourke, obviously against Maryland, he kind of did that twice, but in the other 5 games has been damn near perfect. Um, so I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. Yeah, we don't play Oregon, so you and I think Dylan Gabriel is worse than him, and we don't play Penn State. I think Drew Aller is probably the only QB I think that right now is better than Curtis Rourke. And I think Drew Aller had Curtis Rourke's weapons. If he had his receivers and offense that he was running, he would look just as good as Rourke does, if not better. I think he's like Aller's that level of talent, but we don't have to worry about that because Rourke's our guy, and he's rocking it. Speaking of potential talents and all that kind of stuff, I don't see Rourke anywhere in any of these NFL mock drafts, and it's pissing me off
What are people
because
watching?
he's an NFL guy. You just have to show them the one clip of the Keyshawn Williams touchdown catch. Like that is all you really need to show them. That was a Mike Penix level throw from last year. Like that's what Mike was doing last year at Washington, and we saw obviously do it for a couple of years for the Hoosiers. But that's what Mike was doing last year for Washington, and people were like, "This guy could go number 1," and we're all like, "We told you he was really
Yeah,
good
instead it's
from
going
the."
to be, instead someone's going to take, Carson Beck and they're going to regret it. That's what's going to happen. That's what's
They're
going to
gonna
happen.
majorly regret it. Carson Beck is a fraud. Carson Beck
That's what's going to
sucks.
happen.
That by the way, fire the Georgia football program into the goddamn sun. I'm sorry. I just cursed a little bit. I don't care. Um, I mean, they just had another wide receiver arrested allegedly for um, endangering an unborn child or trying to assault an unborn child. Um, no, this is not
No,
2007 Florida Gators.
no.
This is worse.
There are
This
no
is much
consequences
worse.
either. It's the worst. It's the absolute
Yeah,
worst.
no, that program. I mean, I never like. I grew up a Gators fan, so obviously I have eternal hatred for anything from Athens, Georgia. But I can't imagine being a Georgia fan and finding any sort of solace in winning football games, knowing you have a bunch of I was going to say criminals. That's terrible.
Well, it's just a bunch of
Knowing you have a
distractions, bunch of noise.
but you have a bunch of but knowing that you have a football program that uh doesn't account or doesn't account for any
Have
account, but
accountability.
doesn't have any accountability at all whatsoever. Like I'm sorry, but like at a certain point after like what 90 guys have been arrested for like reckless driving and now endangering an unborn child. Um, there's got to
Bigger
be
problem.
something has to happen. I mean, we had what 3, 4 guys arrested on IU's basketball team, and we damn near ran Kareem out of town. Kirby
Yeah.
should be on the chopping block for Georgia, and I mean, if he loses another couple games with this team, which is entirely possible given the fact that they do go to Texas and they also play Ole Miss and they play Tennessee on their schedule. I mean, it does sound a little bit blasphemous, but there could be a coach opening in Athens, Georgia, which
Yeah.
hopefully they don't look at other teams that wear red in different conferences for
Mm.
coaches because
Oh,
I
that
would
would
like
be
future
stupid.
coaches.
They should focus on other colors. Other
Yeah,
colors. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. They should focus on another Saban assistant,
Yeah. Or
not
like
our
SEC.
Saban
Let's just
assistant.
like look around the SEC. That's all I ask, Just,
Yeah,
poach someone from Alabama, poach
go get Lane Kiffin.
DeBoer to Georgia.
Go get Lane Kiffin. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Lane
Which
Kiffin,
oh my god,
exactly.
Ole Miss fans would lose their mind if he left for
Lincoln
Georgia.
Riley.
Oh,
All I'm
like
saying is
does Lincoln Riley deserve
no, he
like
hasn't. I
another
shouldn't even
job?
said that.
No,
No, he hasn't.
no.
He has not. No, we're not even going to go there. But again, that's another team, and you talked about them a minute, for a minute earlier. Again, you can't. Indiana would have gone to Minnesota and won by 3 touchdowns. They would have. Like if that, sorry if that offends people. It doesn't matter. They could have played in prime time at the TCF Bank Stadium. They would have won by 3 touchdowns. And if you don't realize
Minnesota's
that, you aren't you got to know ball better, more.
Minnesota's defense is really not that good, and
Uh,
they have looked like a good team against Michigan, who was bad, and USC, who was bad. Maryland. Minnesota's not good.
Iowa went there, won by 3 scores. I think Indiana would have done the same thing. Indiana would have done
I
the same
agree.
exact thing.
Indiana is miles better than Iowa. Okay.
Yep. Anyway, we're gonna talk a little bit about Indiana in the Big Ten championship game in the
Question mark?
CFP.
Question
And
mark?
or period, or exclamation point. We're going to be talking about all of those things here in just a second. What scenarios could potentially play out here? What could you be rooting for during the bye week? Indiana, 6-0, bowl eligible. And we didn't even talk about that. Maybe we'll touch on it in a sec. But first, it's time for Who Won the Week this past week in IU sports. A lot of candidates to pick from. How about Kyle Schwarber getting to the MLB playoffs with the Phillies? He had a monstrous home run, I believe, to start the series against the Mets. And then you have Khalil Ware just absolutely crushing it. As far as preseason is concerned, he's going to thrive with the Miami Heat. We just know that's going to be an outstanding fit for him. I love seeing Trace Jackson Davis, Jalen Hood-Schifino start getting going as far as their preseason work is concerned. Of course, Jalen Hood-Schifino, one of the real success stories from Mike Woodson at Indiana, and then he suffered some injury difficulties and bad luck last year. So I can't wait to see Jalen Hood-Schifino healthy, hopefully playing 50, 60, 70, 80 games with the Lakers this season, and easily cruising past Bronny James on any kind of depth chart that the Lakers have out there. So looking forward to seeing Jalen Hood-Schifino doing big things. Of course, men's soccer, women's soccer, volleyball. Make sure you head out and you go watch these teams if you can, if you're on campus. Lots of fun lots of fun sports going on at IU outside of football and basketball. So if you're able to and the weather's nice, go out there, check out their teams. They're competitive, they're intense. I think Indiana volleyball's on a home win streak right now, and they had a very successful weekend. They're on a bit of a heater and a very, very, very tough Big Ten. And so, Indiana men's soccer trying to, turn things around a little bit. They come from behind, win over Kentucky. So let's go. Let's go Hoosiers. Keep these vibes going. Folks, a reminder, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound. Well, Matt, there's a 4-way tie really among the top of the Big Ten. It feels like Tier 1 has kind of separated itself. Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana are the only 4 teams without a loss in Big Ten play. And you could say, yeah, Illinois, Michigan, Nebraska, Washington are sort of next man up, next tier up. But it really does feel like the top 4 here are going to be fighting for the Big Ten title in the weeks to come. Indiana's got a bye week this week before hosting Nebraska and Washington. And, I went and did some homework. And the truth of the matter is, I think the number 1 seed in the Big Ten championship game, in other words, the outright Big Ten regular season champ, I think that team is going to have a loss. Because a lot of teams here have competitive games coming up. We know IU has to go to Columbus. But folks, when Indiana's on a bye week, you're going to be watching Penn State go to USC. You're going to be watching Ohio State go to Oregon. There are a lot of big ticket games between now and the end of the season. As you sort of zoom out and look at this Big Ten, Matt, how does Indiana stack up against other teams here in this top tier? And do you think the Big Ten championship game, making that game, is a realistic possibility for this team?
I love this Indiana team. I think there's a higher possibility that they make the college football playoff than they make the Big Ten championship because they will drop the Ohio State game, and we are not winning that game. I understand we don't put limitations on this team, but I'm just saying we're a
Hater.
bad matchup.
Hater.
It's just a bad matchup. Like Ohio State is a bad matchup for this team. They have an offense that's electric. Our secondary is probably the weakest part of our entire team. And they have Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka on their team. Not to mention, their tight ends and other receivers. And then their running backs. And Ohio State is just I don't agree with you. You said previously on this podcast you thought Indiana was in the same tier with Texas and Ohio State. I disagree with you. I think Texas and Ohio State are in their own tier. I think those two teams are very, 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 very clearly the creme de la creme of the sport. I think Indiana's the tier below that. I think they're in the next 6 to 8 teams right there, which by the way includes IU being in the same tier as Alabama and Georgia and
Sure. It's not like
Oregon,
devastating criticism. Yeah.
No, this is not devastating. I'm just estimate how good that I think these teams are. And I think Ohio State's team this is the most complete Ohio State team I've seen since Urban Meyer was there. I think they're good on both sides of the ball. I think their defense actually legit might be the best defense in the country. Just from a player's perspective. So I with that being said, I don't think Indiana really has much of a chance against this Ohio State team, and then especially it's in Columbus. So just if we're gonna break a streak against winning against Ohio State, it will be in Bloomington. It will not be in Columbus. It's too hard of a task and too much voodoo surrounding the game.
What if it's in
get over that.
What if it's in Indianapolis?
Well, that's the thing, is because if you look up and down this Big Ten schedule, you're right. Teams are gonna drop games, and you listed out the top 4 teams. Well, Ohio State played all 3 of those teams, right, in the Big Ten. That the top 4 teams again, we'll list them out, was Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and us, Indiana. Ohio State plays the other 3, right? Indiana doesn't play Oregon. Indiana doesn't play Penn State. Penn State does not play Indiana. They don't play Oregon, right? And obviously Oregon doesn't play Indiana or Penn State because I just listed out they both didn't play each other.
Penn State hosts Ohio State too. Something to think about.
Penn State also hosts Ohio State, which is why I believe that the Big Ten title game will be Ohio State versus whichever team they don't beat by a significant margin. And so what I mean by that is of the 3 remaining teams below them, they will beat Indiana, they'll probably beat Oregon, and they'll probably beat Penn State. I think there's a world in which they lose one of the Penn State or the Oregon game, but that's besides the point. That just complicates things more. But I think Ohio State will end the season undefeated, and whichever team between Oregon or Penn State loses by less to Ohio State will probably make it in. I see Penn State running the table here, and I think the same thing with Oregon outside of the game that they play this weekend. And so I think Indiana is going to get left out as the 4th team, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for the Hoosiers, and here's why. And an 11-1 Indiana team that misses out on its conference championship because they had to play the Buckeyes, and they're the only team of those Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana to play the Buckeyes in Columbus, right? And lose, but beat the rest of their schedule, they will be in the college football playoff. And then you will probably lose one of Oregon or Penn State to leaving the college football playoff. They'll probably lose after losing to Ohio State twice and having 2 losses on their record, including a loss for a conference championship and an automatic bye. I think there's a chance you could see them, or they will at least drop below Indiana will, right? Because they have to go play Ohio State again. And Indiana at 11-1 will be sitting above them. And it would be a little
Sure.
bit sad for whichever team plays Ohio State twice,
Right.
because not only will they get beat twice, but they're going to lose spots in the rankings
Or
for
I'll
being
even go
forced
even
to play
beyond
them.
that. It's just it sucks for whoever loses the Big Ten championship game, right? Because even if it's Ohio State or whoever, I'm assuming it's a good team against a good team, which is going to happen because it's the Big Ten. Um, you're going to wear a loss, which might make a big difference in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. And speaking of wearing a loss, if you look at the entire context of this college football race, and this is why I'm so confident in Indiana getting in. If
Yeah,
obviously they need to win all of their games, but if they win all of the games that Indiana is favored in, which is every game remaining but the Ohio State game, if they win the remaining games that they are favored in and continue to play the way that they have been playing, they will not only make it in the college football playoff, but they will be probably the 7 or 8 seed hosting a home playoff game. Let me repeat that again. They will probably be the 7th or 8th seed hosting a home college football playoff game in Bloomington.
yeah,
What? What do they play in December?
yeah. I can get the dates later, but yeah, right after. I mean, Purdue game's on the 29th through the 30th. And so Big Ten championship game is first weekend of December, and I think they get going right after that. But yeah,
Right.
no, it's a totally realistic outcome. Just for folks' reference, the tiebreakers for Big Ten championship game appearance or seeding or whatever you want to call it, first is head to head. So, if Indiana beats Ohio State, they'll have a head to head advantage over Ohio State. If they lose to Ohio State, the Buckeyes will be holding that same tiebreaker there. And then it's common opponents. So, if Indiana and Oregon are tied, they face each other. They both play Ohio State. I believe they both play Michigan. So they'll sum up the record against shared opponents and then see where things go from there. And then as you go down, there are three tiebreaker 3, 4, 5, 6. You can Google those later. But in a nutshell, it doesn't matter where you play these teams as far as the head-to-head tiebreaker or the common opponent tiebreaker. So it doesn't matter that Indiana has to go to Ohio State. Ohio State goes to Oregon. It doesn't matter in an Indiana-Oregon tiebreaker scenario. You just, Indiana Penn State tiebreaker scenario. It's just, the shared opponent is all that matters as far as that's concerned. I think Indiana is a realistic player as far as the Big Ten championship game is concerned. I know you didn't like the fact that I'm saying here that Indiana is on the same tier as Texas and Ohio State. I think you'll find out as this year goes on, especially coming out of the bye, when I think Indiana is going to comfortably handle Nebraska, comfortably handle Washington. Other teams drop games. I think you're going to find out like I like where I disagree with you. I don't know if Ohio State is the same, is the most complete team they've been since Urban Meyer, right? Like I think, there have been a lot of powerhouse Ohio State teams over the last 10, 15, 20 years that would have easily dispatched Marshall, unlike what Ohio State did a couple of weeks ago. Ohio State had a very difficult time against Iowa early in that game this past weekend before pulling away in the third and fourth quarter. I'm splitting hairs here. I think Ohio State is excellent. I think they deserve to be one of the top 1 or 2 teams in the country along with Texas right now. I don't think Ohio State would go to Vanderbilt or Arkansas and lose. And what this gets me to saying is that the Big Ten to me is to this point at the top of the Big Ten is better than the top of the SEC. Like I'm
Yes.
sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree.
Like if this like I think this is going to be the primary conversation the CFP committee has with Indiana as we get there because yeah, you're right. The most likely outcome is Indiana wins 10 or 11 games, misses out on the Big Ten championship game, and now it's fighting for an at-large spot. And so if you're going to sit here and if you're going to actually end up, because I can already see it happen, right? You can already look ahead to the CFP committee deliberations and discussions. If you're going to sit here and tell me a 2-loss LSU team deserves a CFP spot over a 1-loss Indiana team, like you just don't know ball. Same thing as far as a two loss Texas A&M or a two loss Tennessee or a two loss Ole Miss or a two loss or three loss Georgia. Like Alabama and Georgia will be in the CFP conversation even if they lose 3 games.
I, yeah, they will, but I don't think there's a problem there for Indiana. I really don't. I think as long as Indiana takes care of business and
In
they
the other
only
games.
lose to Ohio State and the other games and they only lose to Ohio State, they really should be feeling pretty secure. Because if you
Ooh,
look at it, the
okay.
two best
I hope you're right.
conferences by
I hope you're right.
far, I will be right, because the two best conferences by far are the Big Ten and the SEC. It's not close. The ACC is a joke. We know this. The Big 12 is even worse,
But look at Miami. Is the ACC
right?
a joke? Because Miami's the number 6 team in the country, and if they lose the ACC title game, what happens to them?
Well, I think they're going to probably the way they've been going, they're going to lose one of these games. I think if you're an Indiana fan, you're rooting for Miami or Clemson to lose one more game,
Yeah,
because then
I
that
agree
means
with that.
the ACC only gets one team in, and that's the automatic qualifier. And I think the Big 12 automatically will only get one team in. I think the winner of Iowa State versus BYU will get in, and the loser will probably not make the playoff. So that means of the four Power Five conferences, I can't believe I just said that. Of the four
Yeah,
Power Four
you're right.
conferences,
Correct.
two of them are only going to get one team in, which means the remaining nine seeds,
Yep.
including two automatic buys,
Yep.
are going to be from the Big Ten and the SEC, which means they probably take five SEC teams and four Big Ten teams. And if Indiana is one of the four 11-1 Big Ten teams, they will make it in. And well, there won't be four 11-1 Big Ten teams,
Right.
because
Right. Right.
there's
But I get
probably
your
going to be
point.
an
Yeah.
11-2 team.
Right.
But yeah, of the four teams that have 11 wins or more,
Right.
Indiana could be among them, and they would probably not probably they would automatically make it in my opinion. Like they're not going to keep out an 11-1 team from the Big Ten,
But I
who,
don't know. But then
obviously I think they're deserving to be there, but they
well,
will
yeah,
have one against
of course they
Michigan. They would have one at Michigan State. They
yeah.
will have beaten the defending
Yeah. But
runner-ups in
it
Washington.
stinks.
They would have beaten this Nebraska team that they rated highly in the preseason. And as long as you don't go and get absolutely embarrassed in Columbus, and let's say you make it a game and it's a little
Yeah.
bit
Right.
scary and you lose
Right.
by two scores,
Right.
you will be in. You just can't.
Keep
You
it
can't.
competitive.
You need to keep it competitive. You know that's going to be the only game that Indiana loses all year, which is very quite possible. You need to keep that game competitive. Just like I think the perfect version of the game is like that 2020 Ohio State game where we went in and scared the living
Right.
crap out of
Yeah.
Ohio State with Michael Penix throwing
Right.
it all around the yard.
Yeah.
It was a close game. We were up, I believe, in the
Yeah.
fourth quarter in Columbus, which was something that I was
Or
just
tied,
over the
maybe
moon
tied. But
about.
yeah. Yeah.
Maybe tied. Yeah, either tied with Ohio
Yeah.
State and Columbus in the fourth quarter is insane.
Yeah.
Um,
We got this. We're rolling.
like if we can have a repeat
Yeah.
similar performance from that game from this team, then I think we are comfortably in. And I'm
Well,
comfortably in. I think we're hosting.
okay. Hey. Hey, there you go.
I
Look.
legit think we're hosting a game, because again, I'll go back to it. You look at the rest of the college football. You look at the SEC. You see Texas A&M, one loss. You see Georgia, one loss. Alabama has
Sure.
one loss. Mizzou has one loss. Ole Miss has one loss. LSU has one loss. They
I know.
all
I
freaking
know.
play each
You're
other.
right, Matt. But like, does a one-loss Alabama get in over a one-loss Indiana?
Yes, one loss
What
Alabama
about a
gets in
one
over.
loss? Because what about a one loss Notre Dame? Right? What if Notre Dame wins out?
They won't. That's
Let's
another thing
assume they
I'm
do.
banking
Let's
on.
assume they do. Like, let's
If,
assume for this,
if I assume they do, I don't think so.
Indiana has the
And
advantage because Indiana's one
I
loss is
think,
at Ohio State,
and I think also, if I'm going to be honest with you, I think
not
that a
home
lot
to
of the
Northern
playoff,
Illinois.
there's a little bit, the playoff committee is going to have a little bit of a bias towards teams that are actually in the major conferences. Notre Dame gets to play an unaffiliated schedule,
Sure.
right? They don't they get to play an independent schedule. They don't have to, even though they do have an agreement, obviously, with the ACC, but they don't have to play within their conference, right? Whereas the Indiana has to play against the Washingtons and the Nebraskas and Michigans and Ohio States and the teams that they play every single year. But by the way, I don't think Notre Dame is going to win every single game for the rest of the
Well,
schedule. I
yeah,
think
I
they're
mean, we're
frauds.
rooting against them too, for sure.
I oh yeah, you
Knock
don't
them
understand.
out.
You're rooting against Miami, Clemson, and Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, I don't think you have to root for against very hard because they play both Army and Navy, and I think
I would
one of
also
those
include
teams.
BYU and Iowa State in there. You want one of those teams to take an L because the Big 12,
I
we don't want the
agree.
Big 12 to get two teams either. We want that to be a one bid
I,
auto bid situation.
I agree. Well, what I say with Notre Dame is they're going to lose one of the Navy or Army games. That they will lose that game. Those two teams. But you haven't noticed Army and Navy are both undefeated in the same season and will be playing each other possibly twice.
Oh, I know.
One for a conference championship game,
American Athletic
because
Conference, yeah.
they're both in the American, because of course they're the armed forces. They
Yes,
should be in
well,
the American conference. Um, they're both in the American and probably run the table outside of maybe losing to Notre Dame. Um, and then they will play each other for a conference title game for a trip to the college football playoff, most likely.
yep,
If they're both undefeated, that point being the best from the group of five, sorry.
yep.
And then they'll play the next week for
The
the Army
regular
Navy
season
game.
matchup, yeah.
But it's not really a regular season matchup because it no longer matters because the team that won the conference championship gets probably gets into the playoff, and then they have to play each other again. And what happens if the team that won the previous game loses?
That's
Like,
it. You throw it. You
what do
throw
we
it. You just kneel.
what do we do? What do we do? You just send the both of them lose. We say F the troops and send Boise State instead. And you could see Ashton Genty
Oh,
play
yeah.
against the 5 seed. I really don't know what happens there, but yeah, I think you're right. But like I don't believe this Iowa State team at all. I actually think BYU is pretty good. I think there's a very good chance they're one of the four automatic buys. But
Sure.
I'm again not worried about Notre Dame dropping another game. I'm not worried about Iowa State dropping another game. I'm not worried about Miami dropping another game. I
Yeah.
think all of these things will happen. Yeah, we are in. I talked about the 2007 Florida team, right?
Yeah, right.
Um,
Great. Tebow and Jeff Debs
Previously, yeah. I
and
think
Percy
this
Harvin.
season is going to be looked back on very similarly to how that 2007 season was looked back onto by everybody in college football
ACS.
media, where just the most random things happen.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's not randomly happening? Indiana's blowing the doors off of everyone they face so far. And I
It's
can't
not
wait for that.
random. No,
I can't wait for that to keep going through the Nebraska and Washington and Michigan State games in the weeks to come here. And then, frankly, the Michigan game too. If Indiana's run defense, sort of locks down, and hopefully, your guys like C.J.
so
West and James Carpenter and Tyreek Tucker are available to go that afternoon or night.
I know some of you just listen to me ramble about college football
Well,
playoff
that's the point. We
possibilities
want to know
for
what to
like
watch this weekend. Yeah.
I know you just heard me, but here is the TLDR. Indiana gets in if they win every other game and don't absolutely get blown out at Ohio State. And the Big Ten title is a little bit of a long shot, just because I think and Penn State has a very favorable schedule, and maybe the winner of this Oregon Ohio State game this weekend probably gets in over Indiana, especially since this is also me saying that Indiana is probably going to end up with one loss against Ohio State. But the chances of Indiana hosting a college football playoff game is higher than it has ever been
Oh, I
in the
mean,
history of this program,
right.
which I don't think I have to jump out
And
onto a
it's
limb here
because
and
of
say
how
that
they've played, not because of whom they've
yeah,
played.
that's right.
That's the
It's
biggest
about how
thing.
they've played. Yeah, and they're getting national recognition for it as they should. I'm just sitting here having a little bit of a daydream about how awesome it would be to, for the whole festivities surrounding a home
Yeah,
college football playoff game
yeah,
in Bloomington,
yeah.
in the Rock, in Memorial
Unbelievable.
Stadium. It would
Let's
be
roll.
sick. I tweeted about it this weekend, but Harry Lyles Jr. and
Bill Connolly, ESPN,
Bill
SP Plus.
Connolly,
Yeah.
of course, sorry, S&P Plus guy, had their college football playoff bracket projections this weekend. Both of them had Indiana playing Alabama at home. Uh, in their college football playoff projections, which I found hilarious for many reasons.
Yeah.
From the "We Want Bama" chants that would
Yep.
actually come true
That actually happened. Yeah.
to obviously Caleb DeBoer and the rest of that staff coming home,
Yep.
and coming back to Bloomington to,
Yep.
I think the funniest part, which would be watching all of the Alabama fans have an absolute mental breakdown when they realize they're playing outside in December north of the Mason-Dixon line.
Yep.
That would be fun.
Yep. Indiana plus 10.5, Indiana money line. Let's go. I think Indiana's very, very live in beating Alabama in a potential playoff game, or beating Clemson in a potential playoff game. Can't wait to see that. What I would like to avoid is some sort of Big Ten versus Big Ten matchup in the CFP. Hopefully, Indiana can get out of that. But the good news is, yeah, Indiana can controls their schedule. In addition to what you said, I would say, hey, keep that game close against Ohio State, if not win it, of course. But keep it competitive, keep it interesting, keep people's attention. Of course, I'm under the impression, and if I'm wrong on this, I apologize, but I'm under the impression that you can get Big Ten primetime games coming up here at the end of the season. There used to be an old timey rule where the Big Ten typically did not play November games at night. But I do believe that is in play here, as far as Indiana's schedule the rest of the season. So you
No,
might,
they have to, right?
yeah, I believe
Because
so because of the Peacock thing
Indiana,
and the Pacific time games and all that sort of
well,
business. So
no,
yeah,
I mean, not even just that. I thought that the Big Ten owns the 8:30 time slot on NBC.
on
So if you
NBC,
have,
yeah,
yeah, you have an NBC game or NBC level
it's at seven
game,
thirty
you
Eastern. Yeah.
will be playing at 7:30 Eastern. So you will be playing in that third window
So that home
there,
game against Michigan, the
late.
road game against Ohio State. And what's curious to me is what happens the final week of the season? Do they put all the Big Ten contenders on at the same time slot to avoid giving an advantage to the team that plays at 3:30 or at 7:30 at night? That's another thing. Like sometimes in soccer tournaments, you see all the teams in the same group play at the same time so that they don't know what
Yeah,
result they need in order to achieve what they want to achieve. So you've got that wrinkle as well. Matt and I are going to keep talking CFP, preview some games coming up this weekend here in just a sec. But first, just a quick social media shout out, folks. If you're listening to what we've had to say so far and you like what you hear or you dislike what you had to hear, let us know. Reply to our stuff, comment. We're DM. We're open to all ears, all messages. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound on Instagram. We are at indiana.hq. So you can go out there, find us there. Again, like, retweet, share, comment on our stuff. We look at them and as we'll take all your words and pay attention to them and try to make sure that we do the best that we can do here on the Hoosier Sound. And so, as it comes down to the CFP, lots to consider here. Big Ten championship game, lots to consider. It would be fun, if you ask me, it would be fun to see Indiana play with something on the line at Lucas Oil Stadium in December. Of course, I think the easiest path to a CFP spot is Indiana taking care of business outside of the Ohio State game. Go 11 and
absolutely.
1, and take care of business there, and then you sort of just tune in to the Big Ten title game. But of course, Indiana, I think could potentially, given how other games go in Big Ten play, if Ohio State drops games to Oregon and Penn State, if Penn State stubs their toe a couple of times on the road here, whether it's USC this weekend in the Coliseum or Camp Randall in late October. Of course, Penn State does get a bit of a weird one at home to Washington. They go to Minnesota on November 23rd. I talked to you about how Maryland is going to, I think, give some teams some problems down the road, and Maryland goes to Penn State to end the year. Maryland could be fighting for bowl eligibility that game, and all of a sudden they have a lot to play for against Penn State in the season finale. So, if other teams stub their toe, of course, Oregon, we'll see how it goes. Matt and I were talking earlier. I think as an Indiana fan, we've talked to you about some teams you should be rooting against. I think you should be rooting for Ohio State. I think Indiana wants
As
Ohio State.
disgusting as that
Yeah.
sounds, yeah.
Yeah, I know, right? But if there's a Big Ten team you have to sort of hold your nose and really get behind, I think it is Ohio State. Because what Indiana wants to tell the CFP committee is that, hey, we beat everyone on our schedule. We crushed them by one score, two scores, three scores, or Western Illinois by 70. And Ohio State is the number one team in the country, right? Like that's the narrative. That's the story you want to sell. Ohio State went undefeated. They won the Big Ten title game. They're going to be the number one overall seed. Don't hold that against us. So since Indiana doesn't play Oregon, Indiana doesn't play Penn State, Indiana doesn't play Illinois. I mean, it doesn't matter. But like as far as the top tier of teams are concerned in the Big Ten, Indiana only plays one of them. It's Ohio State. You want them to be as good as possible as we look ahead to the rest of the season, which means, Matt, we're rooting for Ohio State this weekend to beat Oregon, and Ohio State is a 3.5 point favorite in that one. Matt and I will preview Nebraska's game against IU next week once the dust settles from this weekend's action in the Big Ten. But Matt, as you look around the different Big Ten games this week, I think you and I are going to be paying closest attention to Penn State USC at 3:30, Ohio State Oregon at 7:30. As you look around, before we do our predictions for this week, like what are you going to be paying attention to in those two games? Penn State USC. Like, let's talk about that one first. That's gonna be one of those cross country road trips, right?
Yeah, again, I was going to mention this. Obviously, I talked about.
Yeah,
I was going to mention this when we brought this up.
yeah,
But Indiana is the only Big Ten team to do the three time zone travel either way
yeah.
to go
West
from
to
the
east,
East
east to
Coast to
west.
the
Yeah,
West Coast or West to East to win their away game
yeah. And they covered
because
by a
USC is
billion.
0-2, I believe, right? Or Minnesota doesn't count because they're Central, but otherwise they're 0-1 because the Michigan lost.
But
UCLA
also,
went to Penn State, lost.
just to be clear, USC lost to Minnesota. I can't let that get away quite yet.
No. Yeah, but you even talk about it. They're the only Big Ten team to go two time zones over
Yeah,
and lose,
yeah,
and also three time zones over and lose.
yep.
Nebraska hasn't has no Nebraska hasn't had a true road game yet. I don't think.
They've not.
So they haven't gone on the road and beaten anybody yet, and they
They beat
lost at
Purdue.
home to
Sorry.
Illinois. But they still that's not two time zones over,
No,
is
it's
that?
not. No, it's
No,
not. No,
because
no, it's
they're
the
not.
same.
They're
No, it's one.
still
It's one.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
one. Yeah, they're not on Mountain Time.
yeah.
So yeah, they're either way to go from the East Coast to the West Coast is hard in general, and IU is the only team to do that successfully. That's why when you look at the slate this weekend and you look at Penn State and Ohio State both traveling out west, play teams out west, one of those teams could lose. I think
Sure.
both of those teams are good enough to join Indiana in the we're legit category. We can
Yeah,
travel and not lose
yeah.
um,
Fair enough.
that far over. You look
Yeah.
at Michigan State traveled over, lost. Washington's traveled to Rutgers, lost.
Yep.
So
It's tricky.
it's hard to do.
That's a very good point. And I mean, we were curious to see how that was going to play out, and I do think there is something to that. Like you and I probably watch more college football than other people who have podcasts. And at the end of the day, like even the big time folks, guys like CBS or ESPN, like whatever you listen to, Matt and I probably watch more than they do. All right, like nine, Ohio State is good. This guy is blue. Matt and I watch more college football than those guys do. But in a nutshell, I'm
There we
sitting. Yeah, in a nutshell, I
go.
mean,
Thank you, Edgar Allan Poe.
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say, the team that made it look okay was, frankly, UCLA going to Penn State, and they started that game pretty well. I mean, UCLA got off to a good start in Happy Valley in the first 30 minutes of that game before just the talent disadvantage took over. But, like, I don't know how good Washington is. Michigan went there, and it was just uphill, man. It was just uphill the whole game for Michigan. And like, Washington outgained them by 150 yards, beat them first downs, beat them throwing, just, didn't commit as many penalties. It was just one of those things where Washington hosted a team that traveled and it was a little bit tricky. And you saw that really get affected in the final in the final score for a game that this books had basically as a pick 'em. Um, if not, one of those teams favored by 1 or 2 points in either direction. Like you could really see, and the reason I picked out that game is because it was projected to be close, and Washington ended up controlling it really for the most part. Wisconsin got off to an okay start at USC, and then USC sort of pulled away a couple of weeks ago. We saw that happen, and so yeah, to Matt's point, this is kind of a tricky trip. And then by the way, when USC went to Michigan, I mean that was the easiest set of circumstances you could have asked for Lincoln Riley. That was clean, man. It was 80 degrees in Ann Arbor, sunny conditions, perfectly curated field, no crap. It was as you could have imagined, as perfect as you could have imagined for a USC road trip to Ann Arbor. And of course, Michigan took care of business in that one. And then, of course, USC stubbed their toe against Minnesota, too. So they are pretty unserious until this weekend. And so Matt and I, as we normally like to do here, we like to look through the different Big Ten games, give you 1 or 2 Big Ten picks of the week that we like across the slate, whether it's a spread, whether it's an over-under, whether it's just a straight-up upset on the money line. Matt, as you look at the different games coming up this weekend, the action starts Friday night with Northwestern going to Maryland, ends Saturday late night with Minnesota going to UCLA. Are there any spreads, over-unders, or upsets that stand out to you?
I just look at this Oregon-Ohio State game, which obviously it's the biggest game this year, maybe outside of that Alabama Georgia game. I mean,
Sure.
it's the biggest game so far, I think, as far as matchup numbers go.
Yeah.
I think Ohio State wins this game, and I think they cover by whatever the margin is. I
It's three
really,
and a
I think
half, yeah.
Oregon's, yeah, I think Oregon has been really good this year. But they've looked mortal. This Ohio State
Yeah.
team really, outside of a few moments and a few games, has looked immortal.
Yes.
So, and I do think that Dylan, I don't believe in Dylan Gabriel. He's just looked so bad this year. And I believe more in Will Howard not to lose the game than Dylan Gabriel. So give me the Buckeyes plus the points there.
Yeah. Minus
And
minus the
Eugene,
points. Ohio State is a 3.5 point favorite, just so you're aware. You're still okay with that? Ohio State's favored by
yeah,
three and a
I mean,
half. You're good with that. Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
taking
Okay.
3.5.
Cool. Super. Wonderful.
I think they probably win by like 10 points or whatever.
There you go.
And then I also like Penn State to travel to USC and just run it down their throats in the Coliseum. So give me Penn State to win, but I don't think
Sure.
they cover that,
Ooh,
right?
okay.
Because I think Penn State's favored, right?
Yeah, Penn State by 5.5.
Yeah, I think they probably win by a field goal. So give me
Yep.
Penn State.
Okay. Yeah. You like Penn State to win, but USC to cover out there in that one. As far as other games that I've noticed, as far as the Big Ten slate is concerned, my upset is going to be UCLA. I think UCLA is going to beat Minnesota straight up. I think UCLA is not, they're obviously rebuilding, they're developing, yada yada yada, but this is Minnesota travel, okay, across to Hollywood in or Pasadena in Saturday, where I think Minnesota's overrated, right? Like if this game was a week ago, Minnesota's not a 5.5 point favorite, and because they went out and they beat USC, who's an unserious team right now. Minnesota's now giving 5.5 points to UCLA, which to me is absolutely ridiculous for a Central Time to Pacific Time road trip where UCLA, again, like Indiana manhandled them better than any other team has manhandled them to this point, and UCLA, like they're going to get someone, and I think they're going to get
Yeah.
Minnesota here and just straight up knock off Minnesota. I'm going to take Illinois minus 19.5 against Purdue. Illinois is in that tier 2 of Big Ten sort of
Yep.
Big Ten hierarchy, and it's a home game. It's a traditional Big Ten matchup, Illinois Purdue, and I think Illinois is they're going to do their thing, right? They're going to take care of business. They're going to wait for one of these teams, whether it's Indiana or Oregon or Penn State or whatever, to stub their toe. Brett Bielema's been around. He knows how to coach ball. You don't have to put him in the top tier of coaches if you don't want to, but he's been around. He's coached. He knows the game, and it's a massive advantage over Ryan Walters, who is, it's a revenge game for Ryan Walters, and I think Illinois is going to be ready to go to show their former coach their former defensive coordinator, what exactly he's missing out on in Champaign. So I would take Illinois. And then just to wrap up here, I don't know. Right now it's at 42, the over under for Washington, Iowa on Big Noon on Saturday. And if that gets out to 42 and a half, I'm taking the under. Maybe hold off when it's 42, but any sort of Washington Iowa game, Washington's got to travel. Iowa good defense. Weather's starting to turn a little bit. I don't know what the forecast is in Iowa City, but I think Iowa's a team that it's just 42 points in that game seems like tough sledding.
That's too much.
for anybody. I mean, it's like, could we just go the whole game without a touchdown? Like, yeah, it's like it's in
That game screams 13-7.
yeah, just yeah. And I mean, look, I think it'll be a good game. Again, I'll definitely sit for 3.5 hours and watch a 10-6 game. I'm a Bears fan, folks. Like, that is in my blood. But 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 look, hey, if you give me 63-56, that to me, that's just watching glorified practice. I like seeing some tackling. I don't see some nosebleeds. I don't see some, a little bit of a physical conditioning test, over the course of 3.5 hours. So I'll be tuning into Washington, Iowa,
I like the
Wisconsin,
other kind of
Rutgers,
physical
Wisconsin,
conditioning test.
Bama, Georgia. Come on, neither of these teams could stop IU. Let's go. Come on, you kidding me? Offense everywhere. What is this? All right, as we wind down here, Matt, on this Wednesday, your final thoughts. A lot of Indiana football love right now. 6-0, bowl eligible, number 18 in the country. Nebraska coming up here in a week and a half. Your thoughts on this football team here in early October?
I have seen some interesting level of hate for IU football on Twitter. I don't particularly understand what we have done to deserve this. It's mostly from Kansas State fans and Texas Tech fans that think they should deserve to be ranked above us somehow. One, F you. Two, what did we do to you? Because you can be mad all you want and say we haven't beaten anybody, but it's not like you guys have beaten anybody either. And oh, by the way, Texas Tech damn near lost to Abilene Christian at home in double overtime. Yeah. So they are lucky to even be ranked, let alone be 18 with us. Yep. But besides that point, are we not the most rootable team, like most easily rootable for team in the history of college football? I mean, we have the most losses of anybody else. I mean, we are the lovable losers. Like it's to the point where I've seen the hate online. I really don't know what to do with it because I don't know. We've obviously never really been here before, and even 2020, there were a lot more important things going on than our Indiana football Hoosiers, as much as we enjoyed watching them. So, all that being said, there really wasn't a lot of hate for us at that time. And now with an absolutely viable chance at actually making the playoff, now so there's some people coming out the woodworks that I think need to have that little thing that's shoved up there taken out. And that's all I'm saying.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. No, that's what I love that. Hell yeah. Couldn't agree more. No, as far as I'm concerned, I talked earlier about how I think Indiana has the quarterback advantage in a lot of games coming up here. I think they have the quarterback advantage in every Big Ten game coming up here, honestly. Even in a Big Ten championship game. But you know what I also think Indiana has in every game? Like this coaching staff is so good. This coaching staff is so good. And I don't know if I would necessarily say they're better than Ryan Day or the Dan Lanning or James Franklin or Tom Allen, that combo at Penn State. But Indiana can go pound for pound with any of them. I mean, they really can. I mean, the way these guys game plan across Brian Haynes and Mike Shanahan and Tino Sunseri, and I know I'm missing a lot of the other guys there. But Everyone on the team is just ready to go. I mean, EJ Williams, take him for example, right? Wide receiver. He's been here for a while, hasn't played much this season. Comes in, 2-minute drill, catches a beautiful pass down the left sideline as if he's a seasoned pro. It's just
Yeah,
easy for him. Easy. Let me do a little pirouette. One, keep my feet in bounds. Catch the ball, go out of bounds, gain yardage, get us in closer to field goal range, if not in field goal range. Let's go. I mean, we saw Sam West earlier this year. Step in a tight end and just catch a 30-yard ball down the sideline. Easy enough. Donovan McCulley, before he put his name in the portal, went into the game as the fourth or fifth string receiver. He was committed. He bought into this team. He was invested in this team. He did his job. It's just, life's a little tricky when you're a college football player with eligibility winding down and you want to go and really showcase your talents elsewhere. But go watch Indiana those first few weeks. Donovan McCulley's pumping his fist. He's supporting his team. He did everything correctly off the field and on the field in his limited playing time. And this is what we're seeing. CJ West against UCLA gets thrown out of the game for targeting. Tyreek Tucker comes in as a rotational defensive lineman, basically gets starters reps the rest of the way in the second half, completely controls the zone. He's focused, he's disciplined, he plays his game, he's impactful. Every player is bought in. Every one of these coaches have done the hard work to get Indiana to this point. And now is really where the fun begins, right? If you've done a lot of the hard work, other teams have worn a couple of losses, 2 or 3 losses, or they've eaten a bad one, like Alabama did to Vanderbilt or Notre Dame did to Northern Illinois at home. Now Indiana's in a position where if continue that attention to detail, discipline, focus, professionalism, anything is achievable. And they've gotten them to this point coming off of 3-9 last year. It's crazy. They've come off of that 3-9 season, and now we're here talking about Big Ten championship game. I love their game planning. I love their preparation. I love their in-game adjustments. You saw Keyshawn Williams become a bigger factor in the second half against Northwestern, even though maybe he didn't start the game at wide receiver. Keyshawn Williams became a bigger factor as the game went on. Zach Horton has been outstanding at tight end. You saw him really get involved a little bit more in the offense there at the end. So not only just the pregame stuff, but in-game adjustments, overcoming that injury to Jalen Walker, making sure the next man up is ready to go. Isaiah Jones, in that case, Indiana doing a great job across all facets from a coaching standpoint. But folks, that about wraps it up for our 335th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your support. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow us at Indiana HQ or at the Hoosier Sound to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to our website, indianahq.com. Find it all in one place. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation. We will see you next time.
Peace and love. Go Hoosiers.